All right, so let's get to the space race. Basically, in 1957, the Soviet Union launched a satellite, and no one in the world knew what the heck a satellite was. All we knew was that it could see us, it could take pictures of us, and people literally panicked. With the launch of this Sputnik, the US quickly realized that we were really, really behind in science and with the space race. So the US, under the President Eisenhower, actually created NASA, which launched the US first into its space exploration. Now, the Soviet Union definitely had much stronger skills in the space race. They will get to space first. And this will cause a lot of debate about who has more power. Now, after the space race, something that affects you and how this is definitely relevant to you is the space race made us realize that we were behind in math and science compared to the USSR. And the United States did not want to be behind in any aspect to the USSR. So the US started to really push math and science in public education. And math and science became the most funded subjects and definitely ended up getting the most budget because of the space race. And this is still something that is a major effect of the Cold War today, because this is where we see, still to this day, most of our education getting a lot of the attention is in math and science, our STEM courses. So, with the space race, we'll talk more about this, especially in the 60s with getting to the moon and so forth. But this is the start of it when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, and now people panicked because we were told that we were being watched. Now, with the Soviet Union, let's talk about some other areas that we ended up seeing containment being tested. So, 1945, the end of World War II, China ended up having a lot of issues because China was occupied by Japan in World War II. So, remember, Japan invaded China, but now China is literally left, and Japanese forces were removed from China, and a Chinese civil war ended up breaking out in the country. So the civil war was between Mao Zedong, who was the leader of the communist regime, and Chiang Kai shek, who was the leader of the nationalist regime, which basically the US supported anyone who was not communist. So the US put all their money and supplies behind Chiang Kai shek, but Mao Zedong ended up winning this Chinese civil war. And still to this day, the People's Republic of China is a communist country. Now, the interesting thing is Chiang Kai shek ended up getting basically pushed out of the country and ended up going to Taiwan. And the US, instead of recognizing mainland China as China, the US now recognized Taiwan as China. And we basically, after China became communist, we stopped all ties with China. We didn't trade with them, we didn't work with them. They were now allied with the USSR. So this is where we call it the time of two Chinas, where the purple part, big China, we do not deal with at this time. The People's Republic of China, the U.S. cut all ties with. But over here, this is what we recognize as China, this little orange part. This is where we will basically conduct trade and so forth. But clearly, having mainland China, ending all ties with that, is going to definitely play into the economic component of trade. So to finish today, let's talk about our last area, which in this unit, which is the Korean War. The Korean War, we are actually going to see the U.S. sending combat troops. So with Berlin, the U.S. was successful with containment. We sent supplies. China, the U.S. failed with containment. We sent supplies. But now with Korea, because the US failed in China, the US feels like they need to be more aggressive. They actually need to send troops. So with the Korean War, we are going to see Korea have a similar issue like China. Korea was occupied by Japan during World War II, but after World War II, when Japan lost all of its territory, Korea became this independent country. Now, independent countries could be influenced by the US and the USSR. So, to make sure the US and the USSR did not gain any grounds, they actually divided Korea in half. Okay. So again, big powers coming into little countries and having a major influence over their political systems. So North Korea, closest to China, to communist China, will be the communist section, and then South Korea will be the democratic section. So Korea, a lot of people in Korea didn't want to be divided. People in Korea just wanted to have Korea. They didn't want to have this division. So, to try to reunite the peninsula, North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950, trying to unify the country. But when North Korea, the communist side, invaded, the US saw this as a threat to the spread of communism. So this is actually the first war we consider it to be the UN, the United Nations, sending the military, but over 90% of these troops were American troops. However, we claim that the UN intervened and basically helped the South Korea area resist communism. So Douglas MacArthur, who was actually a general in World War II, he actually became the part-time governor of Japan to help them rebuild, and he is now going to be the main leader of the military in Korea. So with 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea, they pushed really, really far down south. But then MacArthur came in with the UN and pushed far, far up north. The UN troops with the US actually got right on the border of China. And Douglas MacArthur called the President Truman and said, "Hey, I'm on the border of China. I'm ready to invade China." And Truman immediately said, "What in the world are you doing? Why are you going to invade China? Do not invade China." And Douglas MacArthur refused to back down, and Truman had to fire MacArthur because he was being so aggressive and threatening to invade China. Now, Douglas MacArthur, a lot of people thought he would be in line to become president, but he went down with being fired because of his aggression. Now, with American troops right here on the border of China, immediately China starts to say, "What in the world's happening?" And China now sent troops to North Korea and pushed the US back. And with this war, when they ended up having the Chinese troops push back, they ended up basically settling at a stalemate right where the division happened. This is what we call the 38th parallel. This is the line of latitude where Korea is still divided to this day. With the 38th parallel, the division between North and South, this is one of the heaviest militarized zones in the world. And the North Korea and South Korea tensions is something that's definitely been relevant in the news, trying to figure out how to make peace on this peninsula. But when countries come in and divide a country and infiltrate and basically manipulate countries, it causes a lot of tension to develop. Both of my grandfathers actually fought in the Korean War, and with this war, technically, it was considered a success for the US because the US did not let communism spread. But 5 million people ended up dying in this war. It was extremely costly, and it ended up ending exactly where it started. So this is what the border looks like today at the 38th parallel, heavily, heavily, heavily militarized. And so we're going to see these tensions continue throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s between communist and democratic countries.